beautiful slab of black walnut. It's about just over 6 feet long. It's gonna be a beauty. So I cut the ends off already, kind of trued it up a little bit. Came down here with my track saw. Just kind of cleaned up the ends a little bit here because it was really rough, kind of broken off looking. So one thing that I am seeing on this project is if I were to go in here and try to sand this with a sander, like a belt sander, you can see that gap underneath the table on the right hand side. I would have to flatten this by taking the center down and then going up on the top and sanding off what I call the wings, right? You got a little bit of raised up part there on the sides. So I would lose a lot of the thickness on this table in doing that. And I don't want to give that up because this is going to be sitting on a really beautiful custom stand, kind of a center stand. So I need all the strength I can get out of this thing. So I'm going to take my track saw and I'm going to run right down the center of this baby and drop it flat, and then I will sand it. And then I'll put the two pieces together and then resaw it again so they match up nice and clean. And then once I'm all done, unless somebody tells you that it's been split, you will never notice it. Stay tuned. Okay, well, after a lot of sitting and staring at the slab of wood to make sure I'm happy with where my cut line is, I got my track saw set up here. I got this Festival TS75 track saw. Pretty fancy piece of equipment that it rides down this track. It's got this little plastic edge along here that's designed to help reduce splintering as you're cutting. On this pass won't matter too much because I'm going to saw it yet one more time after I drop this thing down flat. Then I resaw again down the center, and that'll be the critical cut. That'll be the one that will show when I get this table put back together with my domino joints. Domino joiners are looks like a glorified dowel, and instead of being a little round dowel, it looks like a little domino. I put those every 6 inches down the center of the board once I get to that phase. So the plan is get this thing split, flattened, sand it all down, slide it back together, and after I cut that, of course, the edges are not going to be straight because I won't be 90, so then I put the two edges together and I run this track saw back down it, right down that line, and it cuts two equal cuts that'll slip right together. And put the dominoes in there, glue the thing up, clamp it all together, and voila. So I'm going to go ahead and make the cut. It takes a long time to get through this, so good thing it'll be fast forwarded, right? As often happens, the tension of this wood, as I start cutting down it, it starts to try to close up on itself. So then what I have to do is go grab my handy wedge and drive it in here. And relieve some of that pressure off of there. Otherwise it pinches down on the saw blade and it comes to a grinding halt. Like just did. If I don't do that, I can burn up the motor on the saw. So now I get to try to get the saw loose. There we go. So we're looking good again. So now we start. nothing to this. So now, got my nice clean cut here. And next step is I'll take these, and since I've got them to a reasonable length, I'll probably run these through my drum sander and get them smoothed off. And it also helps kind of take any kind of bowing and cupping out of it, because I run a couple of conveyors. I'll show you when I do the next flip. Stay tuned. I just wanted to show you something about working with live edge wood furniture and why it's so difficult. If you look at this board, now that I've got it cut, I cut this off the end of the board last night just to give myself a nice clean straight edge. And if you look at this, this came from right here, right? So look at the gap that was created just by cutting this off. So that shows you how much tension is in the wood, and as you saw when I was running my track saw, it grabbed the blade and pinched it. I had to drive a wedge in here. So there's that much natural tension in this wood to cause this amount of movement. That's why working with live edge wood is so difficult. Okay, so the next step here with these walnut slabs that we've cut is the drum sander end of things. So we're going to use this to help ensure that the boards are flat and get the rough sanding out of the way in an efficient manner. So we're putting on some 36 grit, very aggressive sandpaper, and that'll help me take out any unevenness in the boards and get my initial flattening done. I'll show you in a minute. I've got these conveyors, roller conveyors on either end of the drum sander, so that when the wood passes through it, it takes out any tendency for it to kind of wrap around the belt, if you will. Meaning, if the board is bowed, instead of having it go through the drum sander this way, it'll actually hold it flat, and if I have a high spot in the middle, it'll take that down for me. So hopefully this piece of sandpaper will hang in there for me. It's a little bit weather worn and tattered, but it should work. So got the drum sander set up here. Put the sawdust extractor on. Instead of boring you with it, I've already trued up and leveled this to the conveyor, and I've trued up this roller on both sides, so as a piece of wood passes all the way through this thing, it has to stay flat all the way across. So I'll go ahead and turn on the sawdust extractor and get this thing rocking and rolling. Okay, so I got everything all trued up. I ran one pass of this board through the sander, and it grabbed the one high spot where I got the wing, as I called it earlier, where I've got a little bit of a high spot. It's always scary because it cuts in a nice deep groove in there, and you panic and wondering if you have everything all trued up. So I went and grabbed a big long piece of aluminum, laid it on there. Sure enough, I do have it true. So now I just believe my setup, I believe my equipment, and start making passes of sanding. So every time I go through now, it's only going to be sanding that one end for a while, and then eventually I'll start getting all this will show sanding marks evenly, and that's when I know I'm starting to get back into true on this board. So this is always the scariest part. Okay, fast forward some hours. So I got the board fairly level. I'm taking meat off of both sides and all the edges. I got a little bit of stuff in here. This will be the bottom side of the table, so I'm not worried about it. I'll just kind of sand that out with my belt sander. So I got one true level side to work from. So now I flip this board and then I start working the other side. And then once I get that done, I just take note of the thickness that I ended up at and then try to match it up with the other half of the table. And then I'll be ready to make some next steps like resawing and joining it. So away we go. Thank God for fast forward. So several hours later, I sent the second half of this table through for the final pass. Check this out. God, that is some pretty wood. So this is half of the top. So now we get my track saw, recut these edges with the same blade cut so they join together. Shove some dominoes in there, glue her up, pull her together, let it set overnight, and then come back out here and I'll probably hit this with my belt sander, kind of glaze around over it, just kind of get some of the last little spots out of here, and then I can move on to the final sanding. I'll do a little bit of epoxy filling here. I'll probably drop in a bow tie right here where the crack lives, just so it doesn't spread. And it'll look nice, some kind of a contrasting color, maybe some whitish English walnut would go in here and dress her up a little bit. So stay tuned. We'll be doing another video here as soon as I get the track saw set up. Okay, so now the idea is, now that we've got this nice and flattened, ready to make a rip cut down this thing with the track saw. I'll make one pass, give myself one good straight edge here, and then I'll scoot this in and then make another pass between them, and that should give me two perfect surfaces to join together here. So we'll give her a go here. So now what we'll do, if I can get through here, when you go to build a shop, build it bigger than you think you need. So now we're going to take this piece, scoot it up against here. Make sure we're all lined up all directions. Looking good. Tighten this down a little bit just so she doesn't move so much. Pull this a little snug. Alright. Give this a whirl. Now, in theory, we should have two pretty clean edges to be able to push together for my glue joint. So pop these clamps loose. see how I did here. Guess I could have made my little cross supports in here a little bit shorter so I could walk around, but what are you gonna do? All right. So that's gonna be pretty sweet. So by the time I put some domino joints in there, pull this together, and get this sanded flush, should look pretty good, huh? So next step I do is I take a straight edge and I'll mark. Okay, so now it's time to play dominoes. Woodworking style. So this is a domino. Like I said earlier, it's a glorified dowel, but they're grooved to be able to hold some glue in place in between them, and use this little handy dandy Festool domino joiner, and it's got a little blade that moves back and forth and hollows out a pocket. So rather than just drilling a straight line, it actually moves side to side and clears out an area for this domino to go in. So we're going to go ahead and run some of these in here, and you just have to set all your depths. I already took care of all that. So then what I did is I made a bunch of marks on here and wrote right across the other plank too. So all these lines are going to line up. And then this thing has a set depth on it, so everything lines up perfectly when I go to glue this thing together. Just like that. And then the idea is you take these guys and they just slip right into these holes, and I'll put some glue on these before they go in, and away you go. So I'll go ahead and do the other board and fire the recording back up here after I get all these done. Okay, so we got her glued up. That whole process is scary and nerve-wracking, so I didn't bother trying to video it. But here's the end result. Got a bunch of clamps on here, put some little chips of wood in there to help protect the edges. This thing is going to be beautiful. Poured a little bit of glue down some of the gaps, but I think probably most of those gaps are going to disappear when I sand it anyway. It's just the unevenness of the wood. And checked it out with a straight edge, and pretty darn sweet. Look at that, huh? Pretty darn level. And so I'll still be sanding it to do a final level on it. But no, this is going to be a piece. sander after I got this thing all mostly flattened. I used the belt sander to get rid of all the really big stuff on here. And now I'm going to go ahead and get the orbital sanders out. That Festool Rotex. It's a rotary sander that's also orbital, so I can switch it back and forth. And this is the back side of this walnut table. And going to get the back side all finished and probably finish it all the way through, flip it over so I don't hurt the surface side, flipping it back and forth. So that's the plan. What I'm doing here is I got my Festool Rotex sander, and I can switch it between rotating and random orbital. I'm now with 60 grit, just trying to take off all the long vertical sanding lines that were caused by the drum sander and the belt sander that I ran on it by hand. So I'll keep going after this. This is the back side of the table. I'll get this sanded all the way down here and then flip it over and then start working on the important side. What I'm doing here is I already sanded the flip side of this, so now we're onto the top side of this table, black walnut, and this is where I had my glue joint. And so I'm just taking my belt sander, and I'll take off all these big heavy marks that are caused by the drum sander, get it to where it's fairly smooth, and then I switch over to some random orbital sanders. So we'll keep on trucking here. So that took care of all of the big, deep gouges and ridges caused by the drum sander when I'm using 36 grit. So I just sanded her down with some 80 grit on the belt sander, get everything nice and level and smoothed off. And you can see there's a couple of cracks in here. They're actually diving into this knot. I wouldn't expect that they would go anywhere, but for some insurance, I'm going to go ahead and drop in a couple of bow ties in there. I'll probably do that after I get it sanded down to about 150 or so. Drop the bow ties in, let those dry, then sand those down, and then I can continue on towards the latter stages, which is going to be getting my router out and rounding off these edges. Over here, I'll just be kind of cutting some of this off to kind of match the angles and get rid of this low spot. And then it's on to finish sanding. So I'll show you the next couple of steps coming up here shortly. Hey, I'm back. So I went after this with my 150 grit sandpaper on my belt sander, just to kind of take off some of the rest of the bigger ridges on here. And then after I got done with that, I went back and grabbed my Festool rotary sander, which is this guy right here. And it's funny what you turn up when you start doing that. So a lot of people think, well, heck, I can go finish a slab of wood. I'll just get me a belt sander and sander down, and it'll go quick. Well, belt sanders leave this stuff. So you see all these marks. Funny part is, after I got done running the 150, it looked good till I get the orbital sander out and it starts exposing all these. So it kind of makes little trails all over the place when you're running those belt sanders. And I knew that it was going to do this. I just used the 150 grit on the belt sander just to kind of knock down some of the heavy work and make it easier to find issues like this. But anyhow, that's the kind of stuff that makes these things take a long time. That's why not everybody does them. It is time consuming. Okay, so I worked my way down to 80 grit, and I was just cruising along. I take my handy dandy light and I just cruise along and I look for any low spots and get those knocked out. I'm looking for things like this right here. These will go easy enough with 100 grit when I step up to it. So the procession now is I go from my 80 to 100 to 120 up to 150. I'll switch part way up there into just my random orbital instead of using the rotary sander, which does a little smoother, nicer finish. You don't get any of the swirlies in there with that. And then I'll be ready to show you how to do some bow ties. We've got a little bit of cracking going on right up here, so I'm going to drop some bow ties in there. Like I said earlier, I've got a knot here, probably won't go anywhere, but that's good insurance. I would hate to have that split on me more and have to go back in and pick this table up and redo it. So always take the safe route. So stay tuned, I'll show you how to run a CNC router in a few. And now for my next trick. So on slabs of wood like this, it's very common to end up with splits coming in from the ends of the boards. So in order to keep those from spreading, after I get this table finished, I'm going to put in what they call bow ties. Look at that. And the idea is it's narrower in the middle than it is on the ends. So if I put this across where a piece of wood wants to split, it can't move. So I'm going to kind of lock it in place. So I've got a little split over here. I'll grab my camera and show you. So it's this little guy here. So I'm going to take and I'm going to put this bow tie right there so it spans both of those splits and keeps everything as it should be. So I'll show you real quick too what this CNC router looks like. This is actually owned by Festool, same company that does all my sanders and everything. So it's a little bit hard to do this because I can't really see what I'm doing. But what I do is I put these little Domino strips on there, and that's what the router reads. And I've already gone in here and I've positioned where I want my bow tie. And that's what I see when I'm working with this router. So it basically gives me lines to follow. So when I turn this router on and hit a button, it's going to drop down and I just follow this line and it makes a perfect cut. This router will actually move within the cradle to make sure it's right on track, and if I get out of line, it'll actually kick the router up out of the board. Typically I'll end up with a boo-boo, if you will, on the way out, but it keeps it from doing major damage, at least anyway. These bow ties are really finicky, so I've got to be spot on. So it's slow going, you just do a little bit at a time, you kind of cut this outline out, and then I switch it to pocket, and then I just kind of carve it out, and I go 1/8 of an inch at a time until I've got my depth here to be able to take this and drop it into the hole, and I put glue on this thing and then pound it into the hole and let that dry up, sand off the excess, and away we go. So that's what a Shaper Origin CNC router is all about. Pretty cool little tool. So I'll go ahead and make a couple of measurements here, and then I'll flip the camera back on as I get started. I just need to measure the depths of the bow ties that I'm going to be using. When I do these, I typically try to use contrasting colors because by doing so, it doesn't look like I am trying to hide a mistake. Don't hide mistakes, celebrate them. So it'll actually stand out and it becomes decorative. So pretty cool deal. So I just need to get my calipers out, make some depth measurements, and I'll flip the camera back on and show you how she works. And there's the beginning. So as you can see, it's cutting it out perfectly on line. So it gets a little bit tedious from here, so now I got to keep doing this. I have to go an 1/8 inch at a time. I got 9/16. I got to go down for this bow tie that's going to drop in there. And then after I get down there, then I start doing my offset, and I start carving out a little tiny bit at a time to where this thing fits in nice and snug, to where I have to beat it in with a hammer with some glue on it, and that's the deal. So we'll keep cruising here, and we'll go fast forward. Okay, so now we've got 1/2 inch deep hole. My thinnest part in this is a little irregular because I cut it out of the slab is 9/16, so that gives me a 1/16 sand off at the end. And normally I would have to come in here and cut a little bit of an offset to drive this in. And this one looks like it's just going to kind of slip in there on its own. And sometimes after you cut these things, they'll dry a little bit and become a little bit smaller. So I may look at possibly putting in a different one. Like this guy, it fits a little bit snugger. Is that a word? Snugger. So I think I'm actually going to go with this guy in here. So that being the case, I'll need to go a little bit deeper so I don't have to make so much work out of it when I go to sand. So we'll take a measurement off of this guy, and he is 87 1/28. Okay, go ahead and do the math for me. We'll just call it 11/16. How's that? Make sure that they got that kind of depth all over the place, because you never know, it's wood. So So there's kind of my smallest one, so I'm going to give myself a little bit of fudge room, so I'm going to call it 5/8. So we're at a 1/2 inch now. So I need to go just a little bit less than 5/8 total. So we're going to create a fraction out of this. So instead of 0.625, I'm going to go 0.62 inches down and pound that sucker in. All right, let's check my math. Ooh, that's going to be darn near perfect. So it's a little bit snug going in. So I will probably take some sandpaper and just kind of smooth off the edges just a little bit. Put some glue on there and get a rubber mallet, pound that in there, and I'm going to have pretty much no gap on this. So it's going to be a sweetheart. So I'll pause the video while I do that. Okay, so I got my bow tie all glued up, sanded off the edges just a little bit. Get this sucker lined up here. Hope like crazy that it's gonna pound in there. Grab some paper towels because I always make a mess when I do this. And gonna get her started with a soft mallet here. Nice and tight, gluten tight. Now the key is making sure I've got plenty of glue in there. I like it to squeeze up into any gaps that I might end up with there. Just going to take a little bit of this. I got this one little gap over here where we didn't get enough glue. Pull this off of here. That's going to be epoxy fill, so I'll probably just get in there with a pick and grab out any of the excess there. But that's looking pretty good. So it's sitting proud, is what they call that. Not because it has anything to be proud of, that's just the term. And so I will let this dry up. In, sand it off flush, and then I'll come in here and pour epoxy into the gaps. And we should be good to go. This wood's been drying for a couple of years now. This little crack down here in the end, I'm not overly worried about. It doesn't seem to be under a lot of tension. So away we go. All right. So now it's time to round off the ends. One of my favorite looks at a piece of wood is the end grain. And so on all my charcuterie boards and hanger, everything I do, if I can get away with it, I round that edge off. And you can kind of see how the grain kind of rolls, and it's just a very beautiful view. So I'm going to go ahead and round off all the sides on the top of this. My glue down here in my bow tie joint that we just did needs to set up a little bit, so I don't want to flip the board over and have any of the glue run out and leave any kind of gaps. So I'll go ahead and zip these and flip the board over later on and get the other side done. And And then I'm on to pouring the epoxy. I'll be able to do that today as well. Let this whole thing sit up tomorrow, and then start doing the final sand tomorrow. That's the exciting part. This is probably going to be the prettiest table I've ever made, and maybe the prettiest one I ever will make. I don't know how you can get a prettier piece of walnut than this. I do have 2 more pieces off of the same cut, so I guess those might be the contenders, but this is a hell of a batch of wood. So we'll go ahead and get cranking on this. Run down to the other end, and then I'll get my sander out here and I'll just start tapering these ends in and see how she goes. So I got tape strapped to the back side of this crack over here, and I've got a 2-to-1 mix of epoxy mixed up, and I just put in a drop of some black dye. And so now comes the tedious task of trying to fill what will seem like bottomless pits as you try to pour epoxy into these cracks. Of course, air gets trapped underneath, and then I have to use a heat gun and try to warm the stuff up and help it release the air bubbles down there at the bottom. And usually it takes a couple of tries, if not 3. I had one table where it took 15 tries because the whole thing was just an exploded knot. But you know, it's not exactly rocket science. So we'll go ahead and give this a try. And if I leave place for the air to escape by not filling all the way across the crack, I'm usually much more successful. It's also a bit of a crapshoot as far as how much epoxy to mix up, because you don't know what the void looks like inside the crack. This one's probably not going to be too bad, and I can pretty well see what's going on here. But when you get into places where you've got a knot or a big void, those are the ones that get really tricky. And you go in, you make a pour, think you got it filled, come back the next day, all the epoxy is sank into the hole, fill it again, and you just keep doing that over and over again. It just seems like an endless void. So you don't have to be too awfully careful with this, because this stuff sands off pretty quickly with my dust tool sander. Just put the rotary on there and it grinds off pretty quick. So typically the first pass of doing this is really just trying to get a coat on there, if you will. And I'll do my best trying to make sure I've got it all filled. But I'm also realistic, not thinking I'm going to get lucky the first time and just have this thing filled. So pretty much just plan on coming back tomorrow after this cures up a little bit and is all done settling in. Sometimes you can use a syringe to try to pump the epoxy down into the cracks and kind of force the air out. The problem is the syringes have really skinny tips on them. You know, they make varying sizes, but typically when you start getting down to small enough to get into cracks that are a problem, then the syringe is too big to get into the crack. And if you go with too small of a syringe, this epoxy doesn't want to pump through it, so you didn't gain much. So down here I've got a piece at the end I've got this void down here, so I kind of pursed my epoxy in a little pocket there. And at this point, I'm just trying to force them in there and they're starting to fill up. And hope it just kind of runs into it. So here I thought I may have poured too much epoxy, and it seems to be gobbling it all up on the first pass. Forcing this knot out here. I put the black dye in there just so it kind of blends in with the wood, kind of disappears. So yeah, it looks like I'm going to need to mix up another batch. So since I have so much void still here, I'll probably just go ahead and mix up another batch right now, stack it on there, and who knows, maybe I'll get lucky because I still have a couple other little cracks I didn't put anything in. So anyhow, I'll pick up the video tomorrow after this stuff sets up, and then I'm on to my next move. Okay, so been standing here, it seems like forever, with my little stick, dabbing and putting more more epoxy into these holes. So you can see it just kind of keeps sinking down into these cracks. So what I'm going to do is I've mixed up 2 batches so far and poured it in there. So now I'm going to just let this settle overnight and let it finish sagging in, if you will. And then I'll mix up 1 more batch of epoxy, refill it, let it sit and dry again overnight, and then I can come in and sand down the bow tie, finish sanding around the edges here, and then do a final sand, probably take it up to 220, and then I'll be ready to put on the pre-stain stain and spray 3 coats of poly, and off to the races we go. Okay, so got this thing all sanded down to 220. Got all my finish work done, got my epoxy looking good, got my bow tie in, and we're ready to start putting on the stain. It's honestly the most satisfying part of the whole job. So check this out. Love it when the grain starts to pop, right? Look at that. Always one of the fun parts of this whole process is putting the polyurethane on. So I've got my stains on here nice and dry. I already sprayed the flip side with 2 coats of oil-based polyurethane. Now we lay down my first coat, first of 3. I'll put down a couple of coats, do some sanding, and put on the final coat. I'll do something like this.
just like that. We'll let that dry for a bit, probably overnight, and then come in and get it done.